Hello. Welcome all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our friends and participants who've joined in for this very interesting webinar. Of course, the topic is sustainable mobility, opportunities and development. And it couldn't come at an opportune time, specifically considering the times we are in. We have a fantastic panel here for you, which is actually going to discuss and delve into all of these subjects. Let me start with the introduction with Dhruv Chopra. He is the co-founder of Chalo, which is a leading technology company providing live bus tracking services and contactless payment solutions. He's right there when it comes to mobility as a service. So that is, one leading panelist of ours. Alongside, we also have James Quinn, of course, who is the CEO of Faridian. He's been in this industry for over 25 years. Recently, his company undertook a transaction with Reliance for over 100 million pounds, and they focus on cell technologies and batteries in the sodium space. So two people from the industry. We have to have an investor. For the investor, we have Jayesh Damodaran. He's the founding partner of Axano Capital. And of course, he's been in an entrepreneurial journey for close to 2 decades now. And his focus is, of course, new age tech, disruptive tech, and allied industries. So with three interesting industry and investor panel mix, I guess we have to have lawyers in the mix too. So from our side, from Nishith Desai Associates, we have Aparna. She's a senior member of the e-mobility team and also leads the IP practice. Focuses a lot in relation to matters of cross-border IP transfers, technology collaborations in the e-mobility space. And alongside her, we have Varsha Rajesh, who's also a member of the e-mobility and disruptives technology team. So on that note, let's dive in to the topic of sustainable mobility. I think the first question which often comes is, what is sustainable mobility, right? There is no standard definition. Neither in statutes, yeah, there are some journals which kind of describe it in a certain manner. But the way we see it is that sustainable mobility is nothing but which is changing automation and transportation for the better, which in other words means changing the world for the better. And then the question immediately comes is, what do you mean by, you say, changing the world for the better, right? I think there would be 4 parameters when it comes to mobility and changing the world for the better. The first one would be creation of employment. Second one would be greater access of services. Third, which is very critical, is environment friendly or sustainability of the environment. And fourth, which is a bedrock for the future, is innovation and creativity. And we actually seeing this happen all across, right? We've seen the adoption of EVs. We know that ICEs are going to phase out slowly. We've seen the importance of ESG. We've seen the impact and importance of impact and social funding, right? We have also parallelly seen a development of alternate means of transports, adoption of mass as a service, UAVs, and it kind of goes on and on. And I think on that note, let me go to the first speaker of ours, which is James, with his international and cross-border background. James, how do you see the landscape for sustainable mobility evolving? And especially what are the emerging and global trends do you see basis your experience?
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I find it very interesting right now because it's really there's really a global transition now in towards renewable energy, and I think is what we're seeing in the world right now with Ukraine and Russia and potentially China and so forth. I think it's becoming more important, not just in terms of the sustainability, but where you're sourcing all of your materials from. We've seen the price of nickel go up significantly due to the situation in Ukraine. We're all aware of the issues with cobalt in the Congo and so forth. And I think what's happening, and I think is very interesting, is I think people are becoming a lot more aware of the technology and what the choices are. And I think just simply going to EV or going to to electric mobility doesn't necessarily mean it's better for the environment necessarily. And I think if I look at my daughter who is studying environmental sciences, who's vegan as well, and this generation is really driven about farm to table. Where's my food sourced from? Is it sustainable? People are starting to look at technology that way. They're all saying, well, what's in my vehicle? What's in my battery? Where's that material coming from? And I think that's an important aspect moving forward, especially the younger generation that are becoming more powerful consumers as well. And I think for us, we see that as really a big part of our opportunity with sodium ion technology, because we're able to bring this kind of renewable energy, but in a more sustainable way compared to, say, lithium ion, for example.
No, excellent. I think the key is with the new generation coming, and the point which you made, James, is extremely pertinent. Anything new doesn't necessarily mean, when it comes to newer opportunities or newer products, it necessarily doesn't mean that they're good and they're sustainable. I think on that note, taking that very important takeaway there, let me move on to Brijesh, right? So James has given an interesting perspective, from a global international scope. Brijesh, from a on-ground India perspective, and considering the people you interact and deal with, what are what is the investment climate for sustainable mobility in India, and and the immediate opportunities in the near future?
Okay, so allow me to go back to some years back, because this has not happened overnight. So, in 2017, I believe through serendipity, or being there at the right time, right place, we got introduced to this space, and in this space we got introduced to drones. And with a lot of debating internally, and also with our LPs, we said this could be a good opportunity to be there. And should we wet our feet, and just see how it is going? Because when we look at things, there's an opportunity coming up. There was a lot of talks about smart cities coming up. So at some point of time, and with cost being there, and you're also talking about reducing carbon footprints, this was an area where we felt that we should take some early, I know not the word bets, but we should uh, invest in the entrepreneur, and also in the opportunity which would give. Because if the execution goes good, you are sitting on a gold mine, and Dhruv will agree to that. So that is where we did that, and we continued, again small, again wetting the feet in a small manner, continuing in 2020, 2021. At the same point of time, we also looked at what could be interesting in the similar areas. So we didn't want to get into an asset heavy model, but let's say something which could have as a service, because as an angel fund, we didn't want to have an asset heavy kind of a model. So as we were getting opportunities to invest in all of this in asset heavy opportunities, which today is doing good, we said, okay, let's look at other opportunities. So the geospatial space we are looking at, again from 2019 we are looking at, but then we got the courage to invest only in 2020, part of it. And again, serendipity, right time, right place, that's all. And but then again, as you all know, we have to work hard for that. And then you have, we all know the geospatial policy which came out, the drone policy which came out, and today you find that it's like everybody wants to be in this space, and you see the big wigs of the industry also wanting to part of it. And if we are familiar in India, a lot of news on acquisition is there in play. So with that as a background, and then as you look forward, this space, if you look at whole lot of things, the kind of things which can do for a large country like India, and for the commitment being shown by the present government to have to have sustainable mobility to grow, and especially in two of the areas which you talked about, where the government wants to take the lead and wants to India to be the leader. The opportunity is good. The climate is very encouraging. So now I'll say, if, this is spring for this particular sector, if I have to look into. And having said that, we're looking very optimistically in this space. And if I can say that, and I think we're one of the only VCs which have got investments both in drones and geospatial. So, which is, either we are lucky or, on hindsight, it looks like we were smart. But no, but I have to admit that, it took a lot of courage, and also, looking at the opportunities which could come in, and that's where we are.
No, we will not only say you're lucky, but let us say that you're lucky and smart, right? I think everybody will agree with that. And I think you touched upon a very important point, Brijesh. And that goes to whether it is EVs or whether it is goes to other solutions of mobility, whether it is UAVs or any allied industries such as geospatial. I think the key from a growth perspective is a supportive regulatory framework. And actually, we're going to discuss a little more about that. But the important point is that there has to be a supportive regulatory framework to kind of shape the industry in a positive manner. And that is gradually happening in India. And there are numerous examples as we move along from a legal and regulatory perspective. We are going to discuss that. But on that note, let me come to Dhruv, right? Dhruv is closest when it comes to Indian operations in relation to mobility as a service, considering, the heights Chalo has been scaling in from a ticketing and a logistical experience. So, Dhruv, how do you see the experience of this space since you're on ground operational, and what is the acceptance from a consumer perspective do you see of this industry?
Yeah, thanks, Josefa. So my perspective comes from the smaller cities of India. We are in 38 cities today, out of which only three are the metros of, Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai. The rest are all smaller cities, whether it's in central India like a Bhopal or an Indore, or eastern India like a Guwahati, or in the south a Kochi, and even smaller cities than those, for example, a Kottayam in Kerala, or a Mangalore, or an Udupi in Karnataka, and so on. So those are the sort of cities that we're in, and that's really been our experience. Now, I don't think I have a doubt on whether mass as a concept will be accepted or not accepted in these cities. Rather, I feel it's going to be a roaring success in India when we get the execution right. But let me tell you why. In our experience, these cities that I've spoken of, which sort of represent the vast majority of India's populations, are behind the curve today. You would expect that a city like a Jaipur or a Bhopal or an Indore would have at least a reasonably organized bus transport system. The truth is they don't. We've all also sort of know in this industry that India has very few buses. We have 3 buses for every 10,000 people versus a 20 or a 30 like a European average versus a 60 in China and so on. But these cities don't have even 3 buses for 10,000 people. They would have less than one. You'd go into decimal points when you measure that. So these cities are behind the curve in many ways on organized public transport. And the options that people have today for travel really are paratransport options. That's the undeniable reality on ground. Jabalpur is one of my favorite examples to quote here. They have in 2018 when Chalo entered Jabalpur, they had 15,000 auto rickshaws registered, each of which was a shared auto rickshaw. There is no concept of a private auto rickshaw in Jabalpur. And they had, I think, 60 buses for the whole city for a population of 14 lakh odd people. So if you have 60 buses and 15,000 auto rickshaws, I think we can all understand why we have hell on our streets today, right? So this is, where we are coming from. And now as you start implementing technology, you start leapfrogging, which is typical India style. I think in so many sectors we've seen this, that India tends to leapfrog technology rather than evolve in the same way as the rest of the world. And I think as we implement technology, we start overcoming a lot of the traditional challenges that they have. And we actually, I'm an optimist, but my feeling is that we are racing towards mass. And we will probably get there faster than most people expect us to get there. I don't see this as a 10-year or a 20-year sort of approach at all. I think in just a few years, a few quarters maybe, we're going to have some early form of mass in India already. That's honestly what I feel, because we've seen massive adoption of digital tech as soon as we've implemented it in these cities, right? So going from a 100% cash system where even bus passes have not existed. The simple concept of a monthly bus pass, you'd be surprised it doesn't exist in most Indian cities, right? And people have jumped onto travel plans that we've implemented with our digital tech. So we've had 25-30% of travelers just switch to travel plans within a space of 2 or 3 months in some of our cities. And it has gone as high as 60 or 65% in some routes. Again, in cities like Jabalpur, which till today was struggling with just paratransport options, right? So I think the way Indians are sort of adopting and switching to tech, even in transportation, is at a very, very rapid pace. It's much faster than we'd all expect.
No, excellent inputs, Dhruv, and especially considering the market which is there, right? Yeah, there is a market of, of course, the population goes a little over 1.3 billion, but still there is a very large non-tier one market which is existing, and I absolutely resonate with your thought process when you're saying that once tech is accepted in, going beyond the tier one cities, the opportunities, for mass and, models related to mass, definitely have a great future. So completely agree on those inputs. But let me kind of shift parallel tracks here, because we have spoken about the industries, we have spoken about it from an investor's perspective. Let us talk about what is the legal landscape, right? And what we want to do is touch upon the legal landscape. We don't have time to cover the entire legal landscape. So what we are hoping to do, and Aparna is here from Nishith Desai Associates. Aparna, if you could give us a focused sectoral overview of the laws, how you have seen unfolding, and more importantly, what is the future of these laws in India?
Right. Thanks, Josepa. I think the big question that comes in is the liability, right? With respect to, because there's different players that are. There could be a battery manufacturer, there could be the manufacturer of the body, etc. So a lot of questions come in relation to what's the liability and what are the laws which will govern such liability. So one law which is very important is the Motor Vehicles Act. Obviously, there were some recent amendments that came in 2021 to the motor vehicles rules, which actually are very relevant for or any automobile manufacturers and EVs also today. One of the provisions that were introduced was in relation to investigations for any vehicles which are non-compliant with the prescribed standards that the industry is supposed to comply with respect to such vehicles. So the law provides that an investigation can be instituted. The investigation officer can in fact enter the premises of either the vehicle manufacturer, the component manufacturer, the importer, or even the retrofitter, and obtain a sample of the product for testing. Once the testing is done and they do think that there's some issue could be there, they will issue a notice to the relevant manufacturer, importer, whoever the relevant entity is, asking them, giving them an opportunity to be heard. Post which, if there is a determination that yes, your product is non-compliant, there could be penal consequences, which means there could be imprisonment of up to 1 year, or there could be hefty fines. So the law provides that there could be a fine of up to 1 lakh per vehicle which is non-compliant. So that could be a really high fine. The second one, which is introduced. So one more thing about the investigation is that during the time of the investigation, there is a possibility that the government can issue a suspension order. So the government can say that while the investigation is on, you cannot either sell or supply to anyone the product that's under investigation. That's also very important. The other thing that the law brought in was the concept of recall notices. So this is in relation to any defective motor vehicles. The law states that how the law defines defective motor vehicles is any vehicle that could has a negative impact on either the environment, the driver, or any occupant of the vehicle. So in case there is a defective motor vehicle, a complaint can be made either by the owner of the vehicle, or the investigation officer on their own can institute investigation proceedings, post which once investigation is done, again, there's a testing mechanism. There could be a recall notice that's issued, requiring the manufacturer to recall the relevant products which are defective and refund the money that they've taken from the relevant from the consumers. The law also provides that all these entities, the manufacturers, importers, retrofitters, should have their own policies that they will follow in case there is a recall notice that's issued. On liability, other than the Motor Vehicles Act, there's also the Consumer Protection Act, which is the recent 2019 law, which is very important. Very briefly, we had a law before 2019 for consumer protection. 2019 law has completely overhauled it and made the law slightly more stringent, introducing this concept of product liability also. So under the 2019 law, liability for defective products could be on a manufacturer, on a service provider related to the product, or even a seller of the product. And the law provides in what instance which party will be responsible. The law also, the consequence of actually a decision saying that yes, the product is defective is could be that there could be a complete closure of there could be a direction that you need to stop making the product completely, or there could be other punitive actions that an extreme step could be even the closure of the facility where you're manufacturing. So these are, I think, some of the laws which are important from a liability perspective. We obviously have the FAME policy, which most people I think now know about, which provides some incentives in relation to EVs, to EV buyers or even manufacturers of EVs. I won't go into too much detail, but there are certain incentives in relation to the size of the battery, etc. That's in your EV basis that you get some incentives. I think in terms of what's to look forward to, very recently in the budget speech this time, the finance minister spoke about battery as a service, so battery swapping policy basically. There is a draft policy that's come in a few months back, inviting public comments. The policy that came in, the draft policy that's there right now, doesn't it touches upon aspects such as interoperability, etc. very briefly. It also talks about things like data sharing, different models that could be adopted, etc., but doesn't go into too much detail. So I think this is still in the nascent stages, considering that anyway the government asked for comments from the public, from the industry. Likely that something more detailed, something more well thought of is coming in. So I think that's something to look out for.
No, and absolutely. I think on a related point, right? While the laws are evolving, they're not there. And just for the benefit of everybody, on this session, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We will, direct it to our expert panelists out here. So, you don't need to wait till the very end. Feel free to post it in the chat. But coming back to the laws, and it's a global phenomenon, they haven't yet caught up. In fact, the Motor Vehicles Act, the one which you mentioned, defines a driver which has to be connected to a motor vehicle. Now, the whole question comes is, how do you test autonomous cars without a driver and still make them subject to a Motor Vehicles Act? Now, these sort of questions are not yet answered. But one interesting point, and we'd actually written on this, right? The battery swapping policy, a proposed battery swapping, there is a draft which has been put into place. But I want to clarify this for everybody, on this session. A policy document is not law. I think this is very important for everybody to understand. A policy document is a vision statement of what the law may come or what the law ought to be, but it's not something which is binding in black and white. So that is something which we should all be mindful of. But on that note, right, let me quickly come on to James here. And Aparna did touch upon EVs, and we talk about EVs, something synonymous to EVs are batteries. So James, basis your experience, your close association with the EV and battery space, what are the key growth and focused areas, and what else is required to shape it in a better manner for the industry?
Yeah. So maybe I can just comment on the previous topic and lead into this. And I think what's interesting is if you look at governments tend to be very, let's say reactive, right? I mean, if I look at 911, all the changes in the laws and security while traveling, that came after 911. I think, the train has left the station in terms of lithium ion batteries, and then all of the regulations are trying to catch up with that. And I think it's quite interesting is develop a new technology like sodium ion technology. And again, we have no lithium, we have no cobalt, we have no copper, we have no graphite in our technology. The rules don't apply. It's to be certified, you're certifying for lithium ion. So part of us is putting in those, working with the government agencies, getting a dedicated UN number for sodium ion technology as well to be able to do it. I think what's interesting, and we just had this discussion about 2 weeks ago in the UK celebrating the 75th anniversary of India's independence. We talked about the role of government versus universities and private businesses. And my general view is that government, universities, and businesses, they don't really collaborate as well as they could. I think one big exception that the head negotiator for the UK India trade deal mentioned is COVID. This is where rapidly everybody pulled together to develop a solution because people were dying, right? And so I think that was a really unique thing. We're capable of doing unbelievable things in relatively quick period of time if we're all properly motivated for that. And I think we met last time in November 2019 when we were traveling through India presenting our technology, and I was just there a week and a half ago, Reliance Corporate Park, and things have changed quite a bit in India in that period of time. And one of the things we talked about with Reliance was geo. And if you look at what Reliance did, nobody does this, right? This is going to be a Harvard case study. They invested $28 billion to build a telecom business before they sold a single SIM card. They had no revenue, they had no customers. They developed this over 5 to 7 years, launched the business, and now it's the number 2 in the world, 450 plus million subscribers, soon to be number 1. So I think what they did was they really created an end-to-end strategy. And when you develop a new technology, you need a champion to come behind it that has the kind of demand that a company like Reliance has. So I think that this is a really unique opportunity for India right now. And I completely agree. India is not necessarily a Me Too technology or trying to improve on it. It's a leapfrog approach. And I think this is really, in my view, this is something that's happening once in a generation, and it's a really exciting time to be a part of this space, to be an investor in this space, to be a lawyer in this space, to be an entrepreneur in this space. And I think there's a lot to see what's happening. I think what's also interesting is the opportunity for new business models. And if I look at what NIO is doing, it's a Chinese company with automotive in Norway. They're swapping out batteries from the car. You back in, and within a few minutes they change out the whole battery, right, in a car. And I think you'll definitely see more and more, and especially India is very ripe for this, batteries as a service. I think what's required in order to do that is to have standards, because there's all various sizes. Are they prismatic packs? What's the format and so forth? So I think you need a big company, a champion, to be able to help define those standards. And I think you're looking at an end-to-end strategy in energy, from photovoltaic to battery storage to charging stations to being able to subscribe to energy from your phone. And I think this is the direction people are going to look to. You talk about the assets. They're not going to own the batteries, in my view. This is in my view. And I think what you'll see is that the devices, whether they're a scooter or a three-wheeler or a car, they won't include a battery, and you'll be able to have a subscription to be able to have that as a service. And I think that presents a really unique opportunity to accelerate, because if you can get those kind of standards in place, set up those stations to be able to do that, and be able to have the digitization where you can just do it through your phone, and do it in a safe way, I think that'll be a really massive opportunity for India.
Absolutely, James. I think one soft, and of course, Neo is a good example, which you rightly said. Ample is also there. It's on the anvil. It's recently received a lot of funding, which is the battery swapping company. But we kind of spoke to a few people around in India, and we said, it seems as a great solution. But I think one mindset change which the Indian consumer will need to make is that the battery, the having that possessive attitude saying that when I buy a bike and when the battery is inside, this is a good battery, and this is my battery, as opposed to when I keep swapping it, is it a good battery, or is it, since it's not my battery? But I guess over a period of time, with the implementation, with the acceptance, this model will definitely break through and used. And on the regulatory framework, right? Yes, historically India has always had this problem. There is nothing and there is something. So it's not reactive, but at times it's super reactive. But in the last couple of years, we've at least seen a gradual change whereby there is some amount of consultation in terms of papers which happened before the law is kind of released, but it's not there like the EU, parts of the US like the FSA. But I'm sure and quite positive that as we move forward, the approach with the regulators will become more consultative. But I think excellent points and excellent inputs, James.
Just
Yeah, please.
I just would challenge your concept on ownership. I think the economy is shifting to access
Correct.
economy. I mean, I'm living in Germany. Germans love their cars. We have the Autobahn and most of the major car manufacturers in the world. But very few people own a car in Germany. They mostly lease a car. And if you look at when I was a kid, I went out and got my driver's license on my birthday. That was like the most important thing to get. And now kids aren't motivated that way, and they can access a car. They can get Drive Now through an app on the phone, pick up a car. They don't have to worry about insurance. They don't have to worry about parking it, especially in cities and things like that. So, this feudalism of ownership is really changing to more access and paying for things when you need it and when you want to use it. And I definitely, I understand, people want to fall in love with having something, but that's until the battery's not working and it's dead, and then you want and then you want to quickly be able to swap that out for one that is fully charged and running. But we'll
No,
see.
we hope that we hope to embrace it in the same way. So absolutely. I think on that note, let me come to Brijesh, right? That since again he's on ground, talking to multiple companies. From an entrepreneur perspective, Brijesh, where do you see are the opportunities, for scaling up?
See, if I look, so let's say, there was a serial, like when you look at Star Trek, and or if you look at the serial where the bike rider earlier, I'm talking about 84, 85, used to look at the watch and used to call, bring the bike. And at that time, we used to think, oh, this is crazy, cannot happen today. But if you see, it's actual reality coming into play. So if you look back, and so we have to take, look back, take help from history, and then when you apply the current space. So we are in the sustainability space. We have, what, we are doing. Chalo is doing a good job, but if, let's say, Chalo has a charger at various locations, and if I say, if the charging goes down, can there be a mobile charging unit which can come in and charge? There is something which is happening on that front. Actually, there's, I've been talking to one of the companies out here. How about EV platforms? So you've got multiple bikes, but if you want to, choose a platform like a dealer today in India, if you want to do it, you have a Toyota dealer, you've got a Benz dealer. But if you have four bikes at one single place, can we do that? That's also happening across. You talk about UAVs, which can be used multiple places. Can be used, done for something like bus transit. Can be, metro mapping. Can be used that for, a clear path for bike for when you say bikes, bicycles, which is not as common in India as it is that in Europe. That is something which you can talk about. Let's talk about in the geospatial space. If you say, for various categories. So let's say someone who drives a two-wheeler, the road condition would be different. for someone who wants to deliver through a large truck, or the traffic segment wherein if you talk about early morning, when I want to deliver something, I don't need the traffic data. I just want a clear road. So can these be there? Today they are there in bits and pieces, but this is some of the things which we can actually look about. What about mapping metro projects? What about parking? Parking is still there in play. Is getting more and more traction. So if we look, it is really a matter of time when whole lot of allied industries which we have spoken about, can IoT and ICT come in play and help in some of these things. So those and that is where we would need capital. We'll also need the imagination and drive, and that is where besides the industry leaders who are there, we'll also need investors who also want to invest in the vision of the entrepreneurs. Like Cholo is doing a great job, and Cholo will need money to expand and bring it to every single city out here. But then, having said that, we'll also need money to and capital to drive that, and the usage from the user. So the UI and UX which he also gives should also help the ecosystem to grow. And then again the vision of large industries who can, as Quinn said, and I've been part of that company when in my earlier avatar, like can you put in billions before you actually earn a single revenue? So I think so if you say India is beautifully placed, and and we leapfrog technologies. So some of the sectors you talked about, I'm bullish on that, and we want to go where the direction is.
I think the last line is the best. We'll go where the direction is, and that's a positive direction to be in. We have a question on the chat box. Let me pick it up while we are truly motoring along. Is it feasible to establish battery stations? And the question is from Anirudh. Is it feasible to establish battery stations similar to gas stations, petrol pumps, where one station could provide various kinds of battery access across brands and vehicle types? And are there existing models like this, and do battery stations generally cater to individual and related brands? There are various questions in it. So let me kind of take a first crack, right? So Anirudh, there is no standardized law when it comes to India on interoperability. There is a draft battery policy, but there are various companies which are providing some form of battery swapping or battery infrastructure. In some form, Faridin is one. We have Sun Mobility, we have VoltUp, we have Battery Smart, ChargeUp. So there are various guys who are providing associated services, but to my recollection, there is nothing like a one-stop shop in India which caters to everything under the sun. And I'll take a pause unless Dhruv, James, and Brijesh, this is their experience, they would like to kind of respond to Anirudh in any manner.
I can just say that Chalo's already doing this, and you mentioned a host of other companies doing this. It starts off by powering the transport industry first, as one would expect the technology to evolve, right? So I don't think buses require battery swapping in the same manner as we would need smaller transport vehicles to do that. Buses are a very organized form of transport, and it's far easier to organize them around the charging schedules needed rather than worry about on-demand battery swapping for buses. But when you look at smaller vehicles like e-rickshaws, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, etc., you will find that battery swapping is far ahead than what we all think. So Anirudh, Chalo has got probably the smallest battery swapping infrastructure in India today out of all the companies that Josefa mentioned. But we already service hundreds of e-rickshaws out of one small location in New Delhi, and it is multiple models, multiple battery types, etc. It's all doable, it's all manageable, and I think you'll find that the auto industry will galvanize when they see the commercial benefits that are there to be had for themselves as well as for their customers in this space. I'm actually very much with James's closing statement, the last one he said, and Josefa, I'd love to challenge you on this ownership concept in India. I totally understand where we are coming from in terms of how Indians would love to own rather than lease a car. But I think when it comes to a component in a car like battery, if you were to just make a proposal to an average Indian consumer saying, hey, you can have this motorcycle e-bike, right? Let's say for 100 rupees upfront with everything included in it, or you can have it for 50 rupees and you pay 1 rupee a month for your battery on top of that, right? I'm willing to put my money onto which way the Indian consumer is going to choose on that one, right? And that truly is the kind of cost differentiation that we can offer to people when you delink the battery from the vehicle. So I think cash flow drives everything in our country, and we've seen that in so many examples. And I don't think that this is the concept of ownership of a battery is going to stop an Indian from buying an EV at significantly lower costs. That's what I feel, honestly. So yes, my short answer to Anirudh is yes, it is feasible. It's already happening in some ways. It's only going to expand from here. That's my view.
And we only like to play the devil's advocate, but it doesn't mean we are right all the time. So, of course, when it comes to price parity, Dhruv and James, when you gave the rupee example to any Indian consumer, it will ring just one bell, which is go for it. So I think we'll stick with you, Dhruv. I think you've raised some very interesting on-ground insights. But basis your experience with Chalo, where you guys are already running mass, where you're already running battery swapping infrastructure on ground, what are the challenges which you see, right, for your business? And more importantly, it would be great if you can tell our participants how can those be overcome from an industry or business perspective.
Yeah, I think the first and most obvious one is regulation, right? Transport has been regulated in India traditionally at a state level, and that continues to be the case. And even though we've had a lot of initiatives in the last few years for central policy to start guiding some state level decisions, at the end of the day, it's down to individual states to take those decisions. There's also, in some elements, municipal level laws and municipal cooperation that's required. So it makes it even harder to implement that. The transport is licensed for buses, autos, taxis, even bus conductors need licenses in India in some cases, right? And regrettably, these licenses don't control for quality. If you go back to the original concept of why do you introduce a license to start with versus what it has become now, you'll realize that they're basically just controlling quantity of supply, not quality of supply in any way, right? But what we found here is that governments are very supportive when we've approached them and spoken to them. So one of the most common examples in buses in India is basically a particular vehicle when it's licensed to be a city bus. It is licensed to operate only on one particular route, usually only at a certain fixed schedule and at a certain fixed fare, all of which is decided by the government, right? When we've approached them that using our tech, we have discovered that this can be optimized, this can be improved. Maybe this bus could be shifted to another route in the morning, another route in the afternoon. Maybe the route itself needs to change. Maybe the schedules need to change. We have found that in practice, governments are very, very supportive of making these changes. I think at the end of the day, they all just want to deliver a good quality transport service to their people as well. So I think the practice there is go for it. Let's see. And then we haven't yet gotten down to changing the law itself, but at least they're supporting the practice of providing a better service to people there. The second part of regulation is in payments, right? For mass to be successful, payments need to be massively simplified in our country, right? There are incredibly complex laws governing payments in India. I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with those. And while we also have some of the most disruptive financial innovations in UPI, etc., in India, which we can be very proud of, still the governing laws essentially complicate making multi-merchant payments at one single point, which is what mass would, in its final avatar, mass would definitely call for that, right? So I think we need regulators to view transport transactions differently. Today, there are blanket governing laws on all payments in India, which can cater to all forms of AML, etc., that we can think about. But I think transportation needs to be viewed in a special manner. And it is possible to do that. It is a controllable factor in payments. So that's the second thing. And again, whenever we've spoken to payments regulators, we found them to be quite forward thinking and understanding in terms of what's needed here. Execution may take time, but we're very optimistic about this. As far as industry goes, digitization, right? Today, all payments for transport in India are literally 100% cash. There are the few metro systems we have in India where, cash is converted to a coin to pop into a slot, or a few people use the card. But we are very, very far away from this. I think that digitization is a massive and urgent need, and that's a need that's being driven by industry. The good thing here is that we found that passengers love to switch. It's in fact the industry that's a little bit more hesitant in converting cash into all digital. But passengers are up for it. I think, and you know, we have 60 to 70% of people on buses are young people. Half of those are college going students, and the other half are young working people. They have digitization in all aspects of their lives. You know, even buying groceries is all digital these days, but transportation is not digital. So they're ready to jump into it. It's the operators, and we need to work with them to change that. And then, of course, there's this massive opportunity of EV switch. I won't talk about the environmental or climate impact of EV. Um, for me, EV, while all that is there to be had on the table, EV presents a massive opportunity for India to reboot its public transport. See, public transport is all buses. And it's not going to be metros. It's not going to be these mini pods. It's not going to be the shared two-wheelers or the shared auto rickshaws. Buses have to be the sort of heart, the spine of the public transport network. This is true even in some of the most developed transport systems like London or Singapore, right? So what this does is India's buses are awful. That's an absolute fact. None of us is in a hurry to leave our cars and our taxis behind and jump onto the current buses that are offered to us. But with this reboot, with EV coming in, everybody's going to throw out their ICEs and bring in brand new bus fleets. They're all likely to be air conditioned. The EV experience, even without AC, is significantly superior. But with AC, it's exactly what India ordered, right? And it gives us a chance to maintain our bus fleets better than we've done before. So it gives us a chance to literally start with a brand new fleet. And I'm super excited about that because with EV, we can offer the same or even lower costs to passengers. You may have seen that even bus fares are crawling up in this country over the last 3-4 years. I'm personally not a big fan of that. While you can say, hey, more money is good, it's not in this scenario. I think we need to actively work to hold them and lower them. EVs present a great opportunity to provide a far superior experience at the same or lower money. So I think that's what it is for me.
And in fact, just to chime in on that, Dhruv, there have been some efforts which have been made, I think, even from a government perspective, in terms of constant procurement of EV buses, and which you said. And yes, on the point of digital payments, right? And just for our entire audience, digital payments in India over the past 2 years have had a rapid overall. The entire regulatory regime in the past 2.5 years has radically changed, and it's kind of changing more and more, and it's kind of getting more regulated. There are more serious players which are staying in the industry. So extremely points well taken. But we hope that the digital penetration happens sooner for the overall acceptance and experience to kind of only grow. I think on that note, just considering the paucity of time, let me quickly come into Varsha. I think all of this has a very big impact on data, because a lot of data actually gets generated, and is a key importance of this sector. So Varsha, it would be great if you could share with us your insights on the impact of data laws on this industry.
Yeah, based on our discussion this evening, what we can all gather is the fact that data in this sector is extremely vital. And we also see that there are various emerging technologies in the sustainable mobility space, such as autonomous vehicles, which place reliance on something known as telematics data, which is essentially the continuous collection of data from vehicles, which includes location data and the manner in which the vehicle itself operates, the health of the vehicle, and even driver behavior in some instances. So what we see today is that there are various softwares and devices which are being attached to vehicles for this purpose, to make it more sustainable and to operate better and to deliver a better driver experience. So in terms of the law that is applicable to this sector, we can look at it from three perspectives. The first being the current data protection law, then we have the proposed law, and lastly, the sector specific laws. So very briefly, the current law, which is the Data Protection Rules and the Information Technology Act, which governs the entire data protection and personal data regulation in India, has a very limited scope, and specifically it only governs something known as sensitive personal data, which is an exhaustive list of items such as biometric data, passwords, or like medical health. A lot of these types of data is something that is not collected or processed by this industry, because of the fact that this industry mostly deals with something like location data or vehicular data and telematics. So therefore, from like a general law perspective, today, largely these remain unregulated. So moving on to the proposed law, we have something known as the draft data protection bill, which was introduced only last December. And the data protection bill seeks to govern both personal data as well as non-personal data. So as far as personal data is concerned, location data would be something that would be caught in the fishnet, and therefore the industry will have to ensure that certain compliances, such as obtaining consent of like the driver, or like notifying the person regarding the collection and processing of data, should be done. However, when it comes to non-personal data, the possibilities are multitude, since a very broad definition has been adopted, which means that anything which is not personal data will be governed as non-personal data. So therefore, as a result of which, the industry should be aware that data such as geospatial data or telematics data will be caught here, and they'll have to ensure certain compliances that may be introduced through regulations under the draft law. And something else that everyone needs to also be aware is that there are certain government access provisions that are applicable to non-personal data, which means that tomorrow the government may seek access to certain data sets of like telematics data or geospatial data, and companies will be required to oblige with these requests. And also another aspect from like a compliance perspective is the fact that there are certain data breach notifications for non-personal data, which means that tomorrow if there's like a data breach, for instance in an AV, then these breaches will have to be notified to the Data Protection Authority, which will be instituted under this proposed law. And coming to the third limb with respect to data protection and regulation, we have something known as the geospatial data regulations, which were introduced only last year. And these geospatial guidelines liberalize the entire regime with respect to the licensing procedures and the collection of geospatial data in India. However, something to keep in mind is that the acquisition and use of certain types of data, specifically the items of data which has been issued in something known as the negative list, which include data such as like data regarding like the location of like, say for instance, defense infrastructure, or location of like atomic mineral deposits. So these types of data fall under the restricted category and therefore require some additional compliances when it comes to collection and processing of these types of data. And another aspect that the industry should keep in mind is that foreign entities are restricted from owning or creating or hosting any form of geospatial data, which is finer than certain threshold values which have been prescribed under these guidelines. So as we know, most of the industry players, since this industry is dominated by aggregators and manufacturers of vehicles, they're unlikely to be caught in the fishnet when it comes to geospatial guidelines. But however, what they should be aware of and ensure is that they're licensing the geospatial data and maps which they put to use in their product delivery from entities which are compliant with these guidelines. And they should also keep in mind that foreign entities have certain additional restrictions. So therefore, they must ensure that if they want certain types of data from foreign entities, they may be restricted from hosting and providing these types of data. So the last bit that I'm going to cover is with respect to M2M data, which is machine-to-machine data. So machine-to-machine data is a very large part of most of the operations of emerging technologies that we see in the sustainable mobility industry today. So specifically, there were some recent amendments that were introduced to something known as the unified license. So the unified license is an agreement between telecom service providers, such as internet service providers or telecommunication companies, and the government. So as per these amendments, the regulated entities, which is the internet service providers or the telecommunication companies, are required to ensure certain compliances when it comes to M2M services. So these compliances include things like receiving an appropriate authorization to provide M2M services under the license, or even compliances with respect to certain technical specifications and infrastructure management. And importantly, from a data standpoint, they're required to supply details of subscribers to the government. So the details of subscribers could include something like the type of M2M device, which in this context could be the type of the vehicle, or like the address of the subscriber, which would be like the address of like the vehicle owner, and so on and so forth. So in terms of the implication on the industry, like industry at large, what we could say is that all of the technology and network support services that are availed from the industry should be availed from a licensed entity, which is authorized by the government to provide M2M services. And the second implication would be that there should be some form of a mechanism to obtain consent from like the vehicle user in respect of the data that is collected from them, because these types of data would have to be submitted to the license entity for their as a part of their compliance under the Unified License Agreement.
Excellent. I think that was a brilliant summary in 3.5 minutes, Varsha, of very complicated, laws associated geospatial M2M and the new PDP law. I think I know we've run out of time, but if you all could grant me 5 minutes, we have a few questions on the chat box. We'll quickly take them. I think the second one is from Krunal. He says that what are government targets in the sector in terms of switching from ICEs to EVs? From a procurement perspective, Kunal, very recently, from a bus perspective, and I'll let Dhruv chime in here, that there is a recent tender which is proposed to be floated for over 50,000 buses. I don't know, Dhruv, if you would want to provide further insights.
Yeah, thanks. So India actually is very, very aggressive on switching to electric buses. We've recently concluded a tender of 5,450 buses by CESL, which was the world's largest. And as Josefa said, the next tender they're planning is 50,000 buses. It should be later this year or early next year, all at one shot. I think this will give massive boost to manufacturing as well as the operations framework needed for electric buses in India. You can see this is not just all talk. BEST in Mumbai, for example, has mandated last year that they're going to switch only to electric buses. They have completely halted all procurement of ICE buses. They have already procured 14 or 15% of their fleet is already electric buses. Next year, by end of 2023, 50% of their fleet will be electric buses. And by 2027, 100% of their fleet will be electric buses. Two important things to note here. Mumbai's bus fleet is 3,500 buses today. The 100% planned capacity for 2027 is 10,000 electric buses. So they're growing their fleet 3x while they're making this transition to electric. The other interesting thing to note here for naysayers on climate is that BEST has already switched to 100% renewable energy for all their electric buses today. And now every new bus added to their fleet is going to be powered only on 100% renewable energy. So it's 100% renewable from now, 3x more buses, all electric, and that's just Mumbai. We have Bangalore and Delhi having similar sort of news announcements there. And as a overall country, 50,000 electric buses at a time, that's insane. That's more than 10 times larger than the largest order existing in the world today, which is also us.
Yeah, and just one fact point on the 50,000 buses which which Dhruv just mentioned, they are not going to focus. The intent is not to focus on the metropolitan cities, the 4 to 5. I think the intent is to kind of spread them across at a pan-India level. So I hope that kind of answered your question, Kunal, what Dhruv said. Moving quickly, Rashi has posted two questions. In terms of the usage of drones and practical aspects of OEMs and foreign entities working in the geospatial space. I think the first one is, so Rashi, yes, the drone laws have liberalized in the country very recently. Brijesh is very well aware. I'm sure he's smiling there. And in fact, the geospatial guidelines itself, and this is a very important point for audience to know, the geospatial guidelines itself recognize aerial surveying and imagery. So there is a recognition in law which is given for data collection through drone surveys, but you will need to map the drone regulation in terms of what activities you can do or you cannot do. But largely, it is something which is largely doable. And very quickly, moving on to the next question, it says, what are the practical aspects for foreign entities operating in the geospatial sector, especially those working with OEMs in India? Extremely interesting question. Any subsidiary of a foreign company in India has per se has the ability to use geospatial data, but there are certain activities which they cannot do. So they cannot do street surveys, or they can't do terrestrial mobile mapping. So if the data is licensed from those subsidiaries of foreign companies in India by Indian OEMs, you just need to be mindful as to how the data was connected, and more importantly, what is the threshold value of that data. It's largely liberalized, the geospatial sector, but when it comes to actual licensing and usage, one important point is going back to the root as to how the data was collected, what was the modes used for collecting data, and what is the do's or don'ts on that. And I think we have the last question from Indrajit. It says, what about battery life cycle management and e-waste management going forward? So this is again a very, very interesting point. I don't know if any of our panelists want to add, but there are certain rules which actually talk about e-waste management, and some of them actually don't apply to lithium batteries. There is a separate section in terms of how they need to be disposed of. But more importantly, very recently, I think just last week, there have been proposed amendments to these e-waste rules, which will definitely go a long way to disposal of e-waste management. So the sector is still evolving. There are guidelines, Indrajit, which are there, the e-waste management rules of 2016, but there are certain amendments which are being proposed to the same. I think on that note, I don't think we have any further questions. We've kind of answered all of them, and we've kind of extended by 5 minutes, but I hope that was fine with everybody. And thank you so much for being there, for being here. Thanks, Dhruv, James, Brijesh, Aparna, and Varsha. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.